Neighbor calls police on 12-year-old girl over sidewalk chalk. What's happening in my community is so ridiculous that I need to share it with people who might appreciate the absurdity. I live in Maple Creek, a planned community in Denver with about 200 homes. It's your typical suburban paradise, tree-lined streets, a community pool, a small park, and generally friendly neighbors. We have an HOA, but it's always been pretty reasonable. They make sure nobody paints their house neon pink or lets their lawn turn into a jungle, but they don't nitpick about every little thing. Or at least, they didn't until Victor Harrington moved in. Victor is in his early 60s, recently retired from some high-level corporate job that apparently paid well enough for him to buy the biggest house in our neighborhood outright. He drives a black Tesla with a personalized license plate that reads VCTRNQR, Victor Conqueror, I guess? And from day one, he made it clear he wasn't here to make friends. The first HOA meeting after Victor moved in was like watching a hurricane hit a beach party. He showed up with a 3-ring binder full of community improvement proposals and proceeded to lecture everyone about how our neighborhood was being run inefficiently. I've analyzed the financial statements for the past 3 years, he announced, slapping his binder on the table. And I've identified 23 areas of wasteful spending. The room went silent. Our meetings usually involve discussing playground equipment repairs and seasonal decorations, not financial audits. For instance, Victor continued, adjusting his glasses, why are we allocating $14,500 annually to a swim team that serves only 40 children? That's $362.50 per child for what amounts to a recreational activity. I felt my face flush. My daughter Sophie, who's 12, is on that swim team. The Maple Creek Marlins have been a neighborhood institution for nearly 30 years. The team is mostly self-funded through registration fees and fundraisers, with the HOA covering pool maintenance during practice hours. When our HOA president, Linda, tried to explain this, Victor cut her off. I don't use the pool. Why should my HOA fees subsidize chlorine for other people's children? And that was just the beginning. Over the next 8 months, Victor systematically attacked every community service we offered. The weekend security patrols? A waste of resources. I have my own security system. The community garden? An eyesore and a liability. The annual block party? Excessive noise and a traffic hazard. He even complained about the ice cream truck that visits our neighborhood on summer evenings, claiming the music was audio pollution. But Victor reserved special hatred for the swim team. He claimed the children were too loud during morning practices. He complained about the parking during swim meets. He even showed up at the pool during practice times to take photos of violations, which led several parents to file complaints about a strange man photographing their children. The most frustrating part was that Victor was surprisingly effective at manipulating the system. He became a master at collecting proxy votes from absent homeowners, convincing them to sign over their voting rights so he could push his agenda. He even managed to get 2 of his allies elected to the HOA board. His crowning achievement came at the spring meeting when he convinced enough proxy voters to eliminate the license plate readers at our community entrances. They're an invasion of privacy and unnecessary surveillance, he argued. Despite overwhelming opposition from the residents who actually attended the meeting, the measure passed. The license plate readers were removed the following week. And guess what happened? Within a month, we had a string of car break-ins and vandalism incidents. Mailboxes knocked over, graffiti on the community center, even some petty theft from garages left open. When these issues were raised at the next HOA meeting, Victor simply shrugged. Crime statistics fluctuate naturally, he said dismissively. There's no evidence linking these incidents to the removal of the license plate readers. The community was getting fed up, but Victor seemed to thrive on the conflict. The more people disliked him, the more righteous he became in his crusade to reshape Maple Creek in his image. Little did we know that the real drama was about to begin, thanks to my daughter Sophie, a piece of sidewalk chalk, and Victor's flair for turning molehills into mountains. It was a beautiful Saturday in June. The Maple Creek Marlins had just won their division championship for the first time in 15 years. Sophie, who's normally pretty reserved, was bursting with excitement. Dad, can I use the sidewalk chalk? She asked after dinner. I want to make a sign for the swim team. Sophie had recently gotten into hand lettering and calligraphy. Her room was filled with practice sheets and fancy markers. I didn't think twice about it. Sure, honey. Just stay on our property or the public sidewalk. I went inside to help my wife with the dishes, thinking nothing of it. About an hour later, Sophie came back in, her hands smudged with blue and green chalk, the Marlins team colors. All done, she announced proudly. I made a sign to celebrate our win. I didn't go out to look. Big mistake. The next morning, I was awakened at 7:15 a.m. by my doorbell ringing repeatedly. When I opened the door, still in my pajamas, I found myself face to face with two police officers. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" one asked. My heart immediately raced. Had something happened to a family member? Was there an emergency? "Yes, what's going on? Is everything okay?" "We're responding to a complaint about vandalism and targeted harassment. May we speak with you outside?" Confused and increasingly anxious, I stepped onto my porch. That's when I noticed Victor standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. "That man's child has defaced public property with threatening messages directed at me," Victor called out, pointing dramatically at the sidewalk. I looked where he was pointing and finally saw what Sophie had created. There, on the sidewalk directly across from Victor's house, but not on his property, Sophie had drawn an elaborate message in her best calligraphy. "Go Marlins swim team. 2023 champions." She decorated it with blue and green waves, little swimming figures, and a beautifully detailed marlin jumping through a hoop. It was impressive work, the kind of thing most parents would photograph and share proudly on social media. That's sidewalk chalk," I said incredulously to the officers. "My daughter is celebrating her swim team's victory." "The message is clearly directed at me," Victor insisted, walking closer. "It's a response to my legitimate concerns about the swim team's drain on community resources. This is targeted harassment." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's a child's drawing. In chalk. That washes away with the first rain. The officers, to their credit, seemed to be suppressing smiles. "Sir," one officer addressed Victor, "sidewalk chalk doesn't qualify as vandalism under city ordinance. It's temporary and doesn't damage property. And I don't see any threatening language," added the other officer, looking at Sophie's artwork. "This appears to be a child celebrating a sports team." Victor's face reddened. "The placement is threatening. She deliberately did this in front of my house." "Actually," I interjected, "this is public sidewalk, and technically it's in front of the Wilsons' house, not yours." The Wilsons lived directly across from Victor. "The intent is clear," Victor insisted. "This is part of an ongoing pattern of harassment because I've taken a stand against wasteful spending on that swim team." The officers exchanged glances. "Mr. Harrington, we can't file a report for this. There's no crime here." "Then I want it on record that I don't feel safe in my home," Victor declared dramatically. "This child has created hostile messaging targeting me, and neither the police nor the HOA is protecting my rights as a homeowner." By this point, neighbors were coming out of their houses, curious about the police presence. When they realized what was happening, reactions ranged from disbelief to poorly concealed laughter. After the police left, apologizing to me for the disturbance, Victor stormed back to his house, but not before announcing loudly, "This isn't over. The HOA will hear about this immediately." True to his word, by noon that day, every HOA board member had received a 6-page email from Victor demanding emergency action regarding targeted criminal harassment and threatening graffiti. He wanted Sophie banned from using sidewalk chalk, a formal reprimand placed in our HOA file, and a special assessment charge to our home for sidewalk cleaning services. Linda, our HOA president, called an emergency Zoom meeting for that evening. Not because Victor's complaints had merit, but because she wanted to get ahead of his inevitable escalation. "Look," she said to the board, "we all know this is ridiculous. But Victor is threatening legal action, and we need to respond officially to protect the association." The meeting was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We spent 45 minutes discussing the legal and ethical implications of a 12-year-old sidewalk chalk drawing. The HOA attorney, who was charging us $350 an hour for this nonsense, advised a middle ground approach. While the association cannot restrict reasonable chalk use on public sidewalks, he explained, we could issue a general reminder about community etiquette and temporary decorations. We agreed to send out a bland community-wide email about respecting all residents' sensibilities when using common areas, without mentioning chalk, swimming, or Victor specifically. It should have ended there. But Victor was just getting started. By Monday morning, Victor's crusade against sidewalk chalk had become neighborhood legend. Someone had created a private Facebook group called Chalk It Up to Victor that quickly gained over 180 members, nearly every household in the community. People began sharing their own Victor stories, how he'd reported their holiday decorations, complained about their wind chimes, or sent them certified letters about their garbage cans being visible from the street. What had seemed like isolated incidents now revealed a pattern of behavior that had affected dozens of families. The community's response was creative, to say the least. Children throughout the neighborhood suddenly developed a passionate interest in sidewalk art. Colorful drawings appeared on sidewalks everywhere, none on Victor's property, but many visible from his house. Chalk messages like, "Be kind," and "Community matters," and "We love our swim team," bloomed like flowers after a spring rain. Parents organized a Chalk for Charity event where kids created sidewalk art, and neighbors pledged donations for each drawing, with proceeds going to the local children's hospital. They raised over $2,500 in a single weekend. Someone, not me, I swear, ordered a custom doormat for Victor that read, "Chalk welcome here," and left it on his porch. It promptly appeared in the community dumpster. The situation took another turn when local news caught wind of the story. A reporter reached out to me, asking for an interview about community conflict over children's chalk art. I declined, not wanting to escalate things further, but Victor apparently had no such reservations. He appeared on the evening news, standing in front of his immaculate house, declaring himself the victim of organized community harassment and mob mentality. "I moved here seeking peace and quiet in my retirement," he told the camera. "Instead, I've been targeted simply for asking questions about financial transparency and appropriate use of shared resources." The reporter, to her credit, did her homework. She mentioned Victor's numerous complaints, his opposition to community services, and the fact that he'd called the police on a 12-year-old girl. She also interviewed several other residents, not including my family, who spoke about the community's previously harmonious atmosphere. The resulting segment made Victor look exactly like what he was, a cantankerous troublemaker who had declared war on an entire neighborhood, including its children. The public exposure seemed to affect Victor in a way that community opposition hadn't. Perhaps he hadn't realized how his actions would look to outsiders. Or maybe he was embarrassed to have his behavior broadcast across Denver. For whatever reason, he went conspicuously quiet. He stopped attending HOA meetings. His complaint emails ceased. He even took down some of his security cameras. 2 weeks after the news segment aired, a certified letter arrived at the HOA office. Victor was putting his house on the market. After less than a year in Maple Creek, he'd decided to move on. The house sold quickly, despite Victor's reputation. The new owners, a family with 2 young children, were welcomed warmly by the neighborhood. Their kids joined the swim team the following summer. As for Sophie, she emerged from the experience with unexpected confidence. My shy daughter had accidentally stood up to a neighborhood bully and watched an entire community rally behind her. At the final swim meet of the season, the team surprised her with a special award, Most Artistic Marlin, with a little chalk drawing etched into the trophy. The whole chalk war episode taught our community something important about standing together. It reminded us that while HOAs and rules have their place, the heart of a neighborhood isn't in its regulations, but in how people treat each other. Victor, wherever he moved to, hopefully learned something too, though I doubt it. Our HOA made some changes after Victor left. We amended bylaws to prevent proxy vote manipulation. We created clearer guidelines about what constitutes a legitimate complaint. And yes, we explicitly added that sidewalk chalk is permitted on public sidewalks throughout the community. Oh, and we brought back the license plate readers too. What an incredible journey through the peaks and valleys of suburban warfare. This story perfectly captures how one person's unreasonable behavior can disrupt an entire community, but also how that same community can band together in creative resistance. The most fascinating aspect of this saga is how Victor's actions ultimately backfired at every turn. By calling the police on a 12-year-old girl's chalk drawing, he transformed himself from an annoying neighbor into a neighborhood villain. By appearing on local news to play the victim, he exposed his behavior to public scrutiny and ridicule. And by fighting so hard against the swim team, he inadvertently created a stronger sense of community around it. I love how the neighborhood responded with humor and creativity rather than matching Victor's hostility. The Chalk for Charity event that raised $2,500 for a children's hospital was particularly brilliant, turning a petty conflict into something positive that benefited children in need. This story teaches us several valuable lessons about community living. First, it shows how important it is for communities to have systems that prevent one person from hijacking the decision-making process through proxy votes. Second, it demonstrates the power of collective, creative resistance against unreasonable behavior. And finally, it reminds us that sometimes the best response to absurdity is humor. What would you do if you had a neighbor like Victor? Would you participate in the chalk drawings, or would you try a different approach? Have you ever been part of a neighborhood dispute that spiraled out of control? Share your experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to catch more unbelievable neighborhood dramas from Reddit Bit. Give this video a thumbs up if you've ever dealt with an unreasonable neighbor, and let us know your own HOA horror stories in the comments.